listening to us from. This is the Nyohobai Show with Paus Manju here on the Gambian Talents TV. We are very delighted and glad once again to be back to you here to do the Nyohobai Show. Today we have a special interview, a special guest, somebody who is not a stranger to the Gambia and Gambians around the world. He is here in Seattle, Washington, and we can't do but meet up with him. Nyohobai Show ñu koy def nag semaine bu nekk ma ci waxtaan ak ay ndaanaani Gambian from all across the board. There are several Gambians who came to Seattle, and I have interviews with them. Musicians, the likes of Jibo Balagay, were here in Seattle, and we had the Nyohobai Show, the Fasa Fasa Jakar Lok Nyom. The likes of Honorable Halifa Sallah came to Seattle. We had one with him. Lawyer Usainu Dabo, the Secretary General too and party leader of the United Democratic Party, was here, and we had one with him. And outside of those we face Jakar Lok face to face, there are people who also we interview online, and you've been following the Nyohobai Show. Today, of course, is Sunday. We should be having the Lutah Gambia Ruden Show, but I'm going to tell. As a result, we have to turn it into the Nyohobai Show to have this one-on-one with none but Mr. Justice Cherno Jallow, QC. The chairperson of the Constitutional Review Commission of the Gambia. Greetings to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Pausman. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thanks for inviting me to the show.
Justice Jallow, a lot of the young people obviously may not know who you are. Did an extensive research on you and found out you did a lot in the Gambia, have been in the justice system since in the 80s. But then we will come to that. For the sake of those who don't know Justice Jallow, who are you and where are you from?
Well, I've been on the quiet side generally. That has been the nature of my life. So it's not, it's not surprising that, there will be a lot of people out there who may not know me or my background. But yes, I am a Gambian and born in Old Yundum, brought up in Old Yundum and in Brufut. Went to primary school in Brufut. From there on to Armitage High School and then to St. Augustine's High School, where I did my sixth form before proceeding to university. And when I eventually came back, I worked in the Ministry of Justice up until 1995, and then worked outside since then before returning home.
This is quite soothing. I know everybody from St. Augustine's or who attended St. Augustine's will be overwhelmed now. Rector Sapere, that's one of our products right here. It's good to represent St. Augustine. So big up to all St. Augustine's alumni. From Old Yundum, from a Fuller family.
Yes, my dad, of late memory now, who used to be the Imam of Old Yundum, and my mother from Brufut, Sadu Jallow, and my mother Fatumata Ba from Brufut.
I would imagine that, of course, being from a Fuller family, Imam, those days, for the most part, they might not have been too keen with formal education. Was that in your case, or was your father different?
Quite clearly, it wasn't in my case. I had been schooled both in the Quranic system as well as in the, the modern, so-called modern educational system. And at a very young age, I started the Quranic school first, studied, and then. When I reached school-going age, my dad took me to my grandparents. That's my maternal grandparents in Brufut, and I attended Brufut Primary School. But at the same time, my grandfather was, had what we call the daira, and so I was in that. I was enrolled in that. Okay. So I was attending school at the same time whilst continuing my Quranic studies.
Your Quranic school.
Indeed.
It's just that a lot of our parents or great grandparents were not very keen with formal education. They took it as, well, they will turn you to be a non-Muslim or convert you to be a Christian or any or into any other faith. I mean, that was different in your case, right?
I think as with life generally, things progress, and it get to a stage where people get to realize the values, and the importance of certain undertakings in life, and and our parents are no different in that particular regard. And yes, we've seen those progressive arrangements in the Gambian context generally. Parents of the older generation, we are probably more reluctant to send their children to school, and they prefer them to go to the Quranic schools, go to the farms, and assist and be, part of the, the value chain within the family. But eventually and gradually, as people interacted and as schools were introduced and people saw the relevance of it and started in particular to know more about government administration, the importance of all of those matters, and they realized that progressively that they need to school their children in the formal education system. And I think that is now universal, at least to a very large extent.
Yes, to a great extent. Yeah, if you listen to me talk yesterday, I talked about this young person in Basse whose mom actually took him out of school just because she needed him to help at home. And but then we'll come back to that. Now, talking about Armitage, somebody from the Greater Banjul area, from the Combos, going to Armitage, which was in the provinces, how was that experience like?
It was quite for me particularly, it was quite a good experience.
By the way, was it your decision to go there or your parents?
It was my decision. As a matter of fact, when I was in primary school, getting into primary 5 and primary 6 in particular, the teachers assisted us in terms of selecting schools. And at the time, I had admission both to Muslim high school, which had just opened, and also Armitage. I decided on Armitage because I wanted to experience the boarding life school, and I never regretted it because Armitage taught and shaped my life in so many ways, and the discipline at Armitage High School. I mean, it was tough. But it has its values, and in fact, I was there very recently when we started the CRC public consultations, and I realized that it hasn't really changed that much. So the discipline is still there. The discipline is still there, and I was really pleased about that. And that's one thing Armitage as a learning and boarding institution has really taught me, and that there have been so many beneficiaries of that.
Did you miss the combos while you were there? Were there times that you wish you...
I wouldn't say I missed the combos so much. I miss my grandparents with whom I grew, and I miss my parents as well, and a few friends. But I was, I guess, so immersed in the school system that it wasn't so much an issue for me, and especially considering the fact that at the end of every term, the students went home, and at the time the government would provide transportation to go home, and at the end of it would provide transportation to go back to the school, and everything just worked out well.
Good. You mentioned attending university, but you didn't say where. Which university did you attend?
The first university I attended is the International Islamic University in Malaysia. That's where I did my undergraduate in law. And that was law both in the English common law system and in Sharia law. So I did both. It was a combined program with the LLB, obviously being the qualification at the end of it. Then went back home and started employment with the Ministry of Justice. At the time, our current Chief Justice was the Attorney General Minister of Justice, that is Justice Hassan Bubakar Jallow. And I was there for a few months, and then I had this opportunity to go and do a legislative drafting program at the University of the West Indies. But obviously I couldn't finish that program. I was recalled home. So I only managed to complete the diploma because the ministry needed my skills back home. But after a year, I was sent back to complete the program
at the same university.
At the same university in the West Indies, where I did my master's program in legislative drafting and public law.
How was life in Malaysia? I mean, young Gambian, I would assume,
Yeah.
young fuller man from Gambia going to Malaysia. I mean, those days I would assume there were not a lot of Gambians there. Did you have any Gambians there at all that you were with?
When I went to Malaysia, I went with 4 other Gambians
Okay.
actually. So we were 5 Gambians there at the time.
Okay.
Were we the first Gambians? I don't think so in Malaysia, but at that university certainly we were the first Gambians,
okay.
and experience in Malaysia was just phenomenal. I can tell you that. I mean, I found the Malaysian people so accommodated, so friendly, and we learned so much, and particularly amongst the Malay community, I think the fact that we were seen as as Muslims, not so much different, being of the Muslim background, and the Malay generally are Muslim, so that kind of drew their interest more and more, get to know us, and they wouldn't leave us alone on campus during vacation, and they would even invite us to their villages, and so it was quite a good experience. They've been very, very friendly, and the government of Malaysia certainly.
How did you manage with Gambian food, or you didn't miss it at all? Did
well, that's where that's the one good thing about being outside of home, outside of a country, because then you miss the food, you learn to cook it. So actually that's where I started learning how to cook Gambian dishes. Obviously, you do your trial and errors until you become perfect in it, and that helps.
Okay, fair enough. So how about the West Indies?
The West Indies, again, quite a good experience, and a completely different society, more liberal, in approach, and more dynamic in terms of, societal engagement and things like that. But on the whole, also very supportive. We found people who have been very supportive, and the fact that when this West Indies is effectively, in my view, representative of Africa as well, and I think it was just, a complete fit. It wasn't really an issue so much. Yeah.
So you came back to the Gambia. Of course, you did mention that you went to study legislative drafting. You came as the assistant legislative draftsman. That's the first position you held.
Indeed.
And then later you became the acting legislative draftsman, and then you were later confirmed into the position
of Parliamentary Council.
Yes, into the position. Then in 2018, you became the chairperson of the Constitutional Review Commission. What a coincidence.
Yes, indeed, but obviously it's been a long transition that has equipped me with the necessary experience, because I've been doing legislative drafting from the word go practically, and
you studied it.
I studied it formally. I practiced it, and I still practice drafting.
Yes, in drafting some legislations in the PPP regime, right?
Yeah, I've been drafting for all the period. Frankly speaking, when that I've served in the ministry, in the Attorney General's Chambers and Ministry of Justice, I had been drafting after my training, of course. I had been drafting legislation, and for me, legislative drafting is a passion. It's a very technical area. But also one that gives you that opportunity to learn so much about the law. Because in order to be a good draftsperson, you have to know so much about the law, in the sense that you have to read and understand the law, understand subject matters you're going to draft on, particularly those that are very technical, in order to be able to make sense in terms of what you are drafting. So that has helped me learn so much about the various laws in our countries. Even when I went to the British Virgin Islands as Parliamentary Council, I found myself, in typical legislative draft fashion, learning practically all the statute laws in the British Virgin Islands, and that is always a plus, because when it comes to drafting legislation, you know what is provided already under the law. You know better not to create inconsistencies in the drafting you're making, and it also facilitates your research as you proceed with the drafting.
So what are those key legislations you drafted in the early 90s? If there are any you can share with us.
If I can remember, it has so many.
Yes, yeah, just give us a few.
I've drafted legislation in numerous areas. In the areas of the of evidence, the Current Evidence Act, which was done by the Law Reform Commission of the Gambia. I was the draftsperson attached to that. Justice Anin, I remember, was the chairman of the Law Reform Commission. Also, in relation to the revisions to land legislation and the regulations, I had been involved. I've been involved in that. I've been involved in so many. I can't really remember all of them. But outside of the Gambia too, I've been involved in drafting legislation. More particularly in the latter years, before I assumed, the portfolio of Justice of the Supreme Court. Matters relating to financial services. As you know, the British Virgin Islands is one of the premier financial services in the world.
I was going to come to that. You serve as the legislative draftsman for the Gambia till 1994. Yeah, Jemme took over. 95, off you went to the British Virgin Island. What prompted your leaving? Were you not, was it the junta or what? Because it was in 95 that you went to the British Virgin Island.
It was a professional decision, frankly speaking, and because it was a difficult period as a draft person, where I found myself in the situation receiving instruction to draft legislation that typically affected the lives and liberties of individuals. And increasingly, I found that my advice against some of the initiatives being proposed were not really being taken into account. And I felt uncomfortable dealing with that.
So did you participate in the draft, in putting together the decrees?
I did. In fact, the first degree established in the junta, that was something I worked on. And I remember at the time, we were more concerned at the chambers in ensuring that the human rights component of the lives of Gambians generally was maintained. And we managed to convince the junta to retain that, not to repeal the human rights chapter. And that worked pretty well, but only for some time. Until, and I don't like saying this, but it is a fact, until we had some resource persons from one of our countries in the region to assist with our capacity, and came and advised that really human rights chapter has no place in a revolution.
Really?
Yes.
Just like that?
Just like that.
Human rights has no place.
No, the human rights chapter has no place, and they said it was wrong to have retained it in Decree 1.
Would that be Nigeria?
Well, I don't want to get. I don't want to get. No. Are you surprised? It's not Nigeria.
Senegal?
It's not Nigeria. Well, it won't be Senegal. It won't be Senegal. It has to be an English-speaking country. But look here. I mean, it's fact. It's out there. It's public. It's Ghana actually.
Ghana.
Yes, okay. And they've gone through a lot of military takeovers and so on. And but that was the advice that was given, and that was accepted, much to our chagrin. We were not pleased about it, and but that's what it was.
Okay.
The last thing I did was I was appointed a member and draft person of the Electoral Law Review Committee, and I undertook the drafting.
Okay.
Of the election laws, which I did. So that became an election decree, and at the end of that period, I had to take I decided to take the decision that I could no longer work within the system.
So that was your peak moment, the drafting of those electoral.
The Electoral Law Review Committee's
so that was
work.
The peak moment for you that God gave you to.
Indeed, and I think it's a combination of everything. Really, it's just not one particular piece of legislation.
You had any difficulty leaving? How did you approach the situation when you wanted to leave? It must have been a very tough moment.
It was difficult because I had my parents home and my immediate family, my wife and daughter at the time, and so it was a very difficult. It was a difficult moment, but also I think my family was okay with it because increasingly I was working very late hours, and at that time they were not feeling comfortable, not seeing me home early enough, and a lot of things were happening in the country as well, and considering my own frustrations at things that I thought could have been done differently, not being so done. So in the end, everybody was comfortable with me. It's not like I just left and went looking for a job. I actually got a job before I left. And I remember a former professor of mine at the University of the West Indies telling me, "Look here, you need to go take this job." And I sat on it actually for 3 months when it was offered. It was a very difficult decision for me because I loved working in my country. I really loved working in my country. But then it worked out well in the end because when I took the decision and went out, it gave me the experience I probably could not have had had I stayed back home. And I think that's something I'm truly grateful for.
You are watching the Nyohobai Show here on the Gambian Talents TV. Pa Usman Diouf is your host, and my guest is Justice Cherno Jallow, the chairperson of the Constitutional Review Commission of the Gambia, QC, of course, we have to add on to it. Anyway, you left Gambia, went on to a completely new country in a completely different area. Just yesterday at the ceremony, at the event, I think the discussion came about having chief justices, Gambian justices, whether the Gambia should have local or Gambian citizens serving as justice, or should we have foreigners be able to serve? Well, you've served as the chief justice of a different country.
As Attorney General.
Attorney General, yes, my bad, yes, Attorney General of a different country. How was it like? What was the difference between the Gambian justice system versus the British Virgin Islands?
It is essentially the same. Both are English-speaking jurisdictions, and both practice the English common law. So in that respect, the system of law is actually the same. The statutes, of course, naturally would differ. And it was an easy settlement for me when I moved there, and I moved there not as Attorney General but as Parliamentary Counsel.
Parliamentary Counsel, yes.
And and it was just supposed to be a contract for 2 years, which I ended up renewing for another 2 years. But before the end of that 2-year period, the incumbent Attorney General at the time decided to leave, and I was offered the position, and it wasn't really a difficult issue for me in terms of settling in the BVI. It's a small country, of course, but again, it is a country that has so much respect for law and the rule of law. And the position of Attorney General is very much independent.
I was going to ask you, how was the separation of power there, the checks and balances?
Yeah. I mean, the Office of Attorney General is apolitical, and you don't engage in partisan politics. Yes, you sit in cabinet and you're a member of the legislative council at the time, which is now the House of Assembly, but you take a non-partisan role. So you're the chief legal advisor to the government, and also the advisor to the legislature, and everybody respected that. And I've had my obviously peak moments of frustration, and obviously the Office of Attorney General is very demanding, very challenging, and is a thankless position as well, and any Attorney General who really served in the position should be able to tell you that. But the difference in the BVI was that everybody recognized the independence of the Office of Attorney General. And even where ministers of government politicians generally disagreed or did not feel comfortable with the advice of the Attorney General. They thought twice before going against it. And generally, during my tenure, I think I received that level of respect because you find that you are in a position where your only friend and your only protector is the law. It's not the politician. It's not the governor. It's not anybody else. So you have to be very careful in terms of what you advise so that you are able to defend it from legal perspective. And that worked out well. Like I said, we had our moments of debate, but ultimately they saw the value in it. And I served under 2 administrations in the BVI because I was Attorney General for 7.5 years.
Okay.
And at the end of each, I think there was a general level of appreciation in terms of the work that I've done.
You work under the same administration, or there had been a change of government?
There had been a change of government.
And you still I didn't send you packing?
No. Well, the opposition, obviously, I was one that criticism was focused on, and you can understand in politics that sometimes you find it very convenient to be a target, especially as a foreigner. As a foreigner, taking very difficult decisions that some felt we are not.
If you were a citizen, you wouldn't have acted that way, right?
Well,
those comments came up.
Yeah, you have comments like that, but I think overall there was respect for the Office of Attorney General, and there was respect for me as well, and I think that helped me. In so many ways. So in the end, it never really became an issue. Like I said, it was challenging, it was difficult. You had moments of sleepless nights, but that's part of the challenge, that's part of the experience you learn. And what I've discovered is that I've become more tolerant, more patient, in those positions. Because ultimately, those are the things that really make you a good person. And those are the things that hold you up as a true professional. You learn to be humble, rather than wait to be humble. So that really has been a wonderful experience.
So while you were in the British Virgin Island, at any point did the regime, the junta, approach you or call you to go back and work for them or something?
No direct interface with the junta whatsoever, because after I had left, and frankly speaking, before I left, you remember at that time, you couldn't go unless you had direct permission from the junta. So I just applied to go on for medical, checkup, which was the position, but in the end ended up, in that position. And I came back after 2 years, and obviously I've always tried to keep low as far as my life is my life in general concerned. I did have 1 or 2, maybe 2 actually, approaches, but not from the administration directly, but from individuals connected to the administration. But my take on it was simply I have legal obligation elsewhere, and I had to keep that.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you feel hearing all the stuff that were being rumored about the way the junta was administering the country? You must have seen a lot of things, and the transformation and transition from one level to the other, how they were getting comfortable, especially with human rights violations and stuff. Of course, you are a Gambian. How did that feel?
It was very frustrating, I must say. The whole coup for me was unsettling, going through it and seeing some of the behavior really was even more frustrating. Yes, we could blame the junta for whatever it is, and it will be blame, worth it. But at the same time, I came to realize that we as Gambians were part of the problem. And we're not on the junta. We kind of curried favors with the junta to look good or to, assume positions. And I don't like to say this, but I have to be blunt about it. We played the hypocrite,
How?
and, saying stuff that is not, and reporting people that have done nothing, and all in the hope of getting favors, and things like that. And even worse, at the professional level, is not being a professional. And that kind of frustrated me. I mean, seeing those happening, and I was seeing them every day, basically across government, and it was frustrating.
What is your reaction to folks who would say that folks like you, who were there from the get-go, actually set the pace for the 22 years that we ended up in? Because from the beginning, those of you that were there had the opportunity to say no, to put your foot down, especially when you knew, for example, the advice you said that the Ghanaians gave that human rights, whatever you said, did not have room in a junta or in a military rule. You could have said no to some of those things, and then we wouldn't have reached this level. I mean, the sacrifice would have been done at that time rather than 22 years later. What's your reaction to folks who would?
Well, I respect individual opinions on things, and people are free and certainly to make and draw their own conclusions in terms of certain conduct or behavior, and that's something I totally respect. But we have to understand, at the time, the Gambia civil service was a highly professional civil service. And as civil servants, we never got ourselves involved in politics, and that was, and I like the civil service the way it was. It wasn't perfect. It had its shortcomings, but compared, if you were to ask my opinion, compared to what I see today, we all experience today, it was far more professional. And so we did not get involved in that. But obviously, like I said, in my own particular situation, and I'm sure I see the same thing for colleagues at the time, at the Attorney General's Chambers and Ministry of Justice. We had to face the reality.
No, the reality.
The reality was that we have a regime that has settled, and there was nobody that was going to remove the regime at the time. That was the reality here. So the question is, how do we manage our institutions? How do we ensure that the rights of Gambians, the liberties, the freedoms are respected? That was why we at the Attorney General's Chambers level at the time said, you know what, retain the human rights chapter. You can remove remove the legislature naturally. You can remove the executive and rule by decree, which was naturally what was happening, and so on. But at least respect the human rights chapter, respect the chapter on the judiciary. And we succeeded to a point, like I said, until they got different advice, and decided to forego that. And we realized that gradually things had started changing for the worse. Things had started changing for the worse. And the question was, do you remain within the system or not? And I don't blame anybody who has remained within the system, because somebody has to remain within the system to try and help manage the situation. After all, it's our country. We all can't disappear, and abandon our country. And even those of us who had left for professional reasons or other reasons, it's not like we've abandoned our government or we've abandoned our country, but we felt that we couldn't work within the system, and in a way that has paid off, because we went off and had earned a lot of experience, which we are now able to utilize, for the good of our country. And obviously, any Gambian who has been out and has come back, or has even contributed from outside, is contributing to national development. And I think that's something we've got to understand. But for people to say that we abandoned the country at the time of need, they're entitled to those opinions. I have a different opinion on that.
You are watching the Nyohobai Show here on the Gambian Talents TV. Pa Ousman Diouf is your host, and QC Justice Cherno Jallow, Chairperson of the Constitutional Review Commission of the Gambia, is my guest. Fast forward, you did the British Virgin Island and 7 years and change, right? What next for you?
Well, I was there, like I said, for 7.5 years. after 7 years, frankly speaking, I thought I had burnt out.
Did you have a term limit, or it was?
No, it was on contracts that I kept renewing.
Okay.
But after my last contract, I gave notice of 20 months that I would leave,
Okay.
and because I realized that I needed to move on.
Okay.
At some point, the Office of Attorney General is quite stressful, and you know, when you realize you are burnt out, then you come to the realization you cannot contribute more than what you're already contributing.
Okay.
So that's the time to phase out. And I decided that that time had come. And it was a difficult decision for me, but one supported by my wife, my children, and that was quite helpful. Obviously, the government at the day wanted me to continue, and stay on. But what I did was, in the end, we agreed I would stay within the country and within the system, but in a different capacity, where I took up appointment as Director of Policy Research and Statistics at the British Virgin Islands Financial Services Commission, which is really the key, one of the key institutions, or the only key institution, frankly speaking, that drives the international finance portfolio of the government, and and that's a position that I felt
less stressful position, and you created.
It was a less stressful position politically,
Okay.
because then you have the opportunity just to be a professional and deal with professional issues, and not worry about politics. No worry about getting a call in the middle of the night and being told, look, we need this contract by 9 a.m. or a senior civil servant calling you and telling you, oh, my ministers asked me to do this, but I don't think it's right. What do I do? And things like that. And so from that perspective, it was different and more comforting and more settling. But I did not for one moment regret being Attorney General and performing that, because it really helped to equip me, it helped to develop my experience, and I think it made me a better person amongst other things. So I think that really has been a very helpful process. And I think it's because of that recognition, I reckon it can't be anything different. And the period I served as Attorney General and the work I did, that I was conferred the title of Queen's Counsel, which is the QC, and that was just before I demitted that office back in 2007.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did you do after that? Just fast forward. What are some of the things you did until we get to the CRC? I just want to fast forward. What are some of the 2007 to 2016 or 17 is a long period, of course, 10 years, obviously. What was life? What did life hold for you within those 10 years? What did you do?
Within that period, obviously, I continued with the British Virgin Islands Financial Services Commission. I was looking, and at the same time doing some work for the government,
Government
of the British Virgin Islands. I was leading a lot of the treaty negotiations internationally.
Okay.
And I continued to draft legislation. In fact, I've drafted numerous financial services legislation, including the Financial Services Commission, which established the Financial Services Commission, which is now the premier institution that drives financial services in the British Virgin Islands. And I continued to serve in different capacities, being members of different organizations. And I headed the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force on Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing. I was chair in 2012, 2013, and again representing the British Virgin Islands. Currently, even the vice chairperson of the BVI International Arbitration Center. So I've been doing.
So you are still connected.
Yeah, I am
citizen?
still.
Did you get citizenship? They offered you citizenship.
Well, the reality, having been there for quite a period, you get very attached to the jurisdiction. I'm very much, at least I consider myself very much a BVI lander. But obviously I've never forgotten my roots as a Gambian. I'll always remain a Gambian, of course. But again, I consider myself to be one blessed individual in the sense that having lived in the British Virgin Islands and interacted with the people of that country, I can't say anything but make the point that it's one country that I respect so much. I respect the people so much because not so much because of what they've done for me and the fact that they appreciated my work. They realized that I wasn't there as a tourist. I was there to work. But more so is because they appreciated so much in terms of what I did. I mean, obviously, I was subject to criticism, and things like that, which is normal. But the fact of the matter is, even in circumstances where I was criticized, some BB Islanders came to my defense.
Okay.
And the people just recognized the level of
So
contribution.
did you go back and forth to Banjul?
Oh yeah, I mean, no, Musuma jaar Dakar. Musuma jaar Dakar. I've never been through Dakar.
No, you are not one of those people who are there international appointments and will come to Banjul.
No. I never remember when I left the Gambia. I left under very amicable circumstances.
Okay.
I did not. I did not get into any conflict with anybody. I mean, I did not have any unnecessary exchanges, and things like that.
But suspicion was the order of the day. Okay, if he here to sabotage, what will he be here for, this and that? Maybe the international community sent him over. All of those suspicions could have been possible.
Yeah, they could have been possible, but I believe I had been the type that, completely disengaged from politics. And I did not mingle around political circles, and kept a low profile, kept to myself. But I was a regular in my country. I've always ordinarily lived in the Gambia.
Okay.
In fact,
what's the longest you stayed when you came over?
When I come, it would have been 2 months, 2.5 months.
Okay.
And every year, particularly in the last 10, 15 years, I would come twice a year.
Okay.
To the country. And for me, it wasn't an issue. I've never landed myself in trouble, never had issue with people. Obviously, people used to warn me, be careful, about what you say, who you talk to, and things like that. That helps. That helps. But did I ever get into trouble with the junta or the government after that? Maybe at the beginning, because I was too vocal and I made my frustrations known, but it never led to anything. I think I was genuine, and that's what I want to do.
So, fast forward, what role did you play, if any, in ushering out the dictatorship? The 22 years, obviously you didn't like it, you said it and everything. Did you play any particular role that you think is significant? A lot of people take credit for the change of government. We did this, we did that. Diaspora said, okay, we are the ones that send the money, we are the ones online. Political parties say, okay, we did this, we did that. I mean, different people play different roles, and it is the entire Gambian population. Some people were behind the scenes and doing a lot of things. Is there anything you personally contributed?
There's nothing that I would want to say I did. Even if I did, I don't think it would be appropriate, in my view, to be making remarks like.
It's important.
No. Frankly speaking, whatever I did in good spirit. And it was good for my country.
Some of the things you did in the British Virgin Islands and of course in the Gambia earlier.
Yeah, but under normal circumstances. But really, I don't want to get into the discussion really and about what I did or what I didn't know or what somebody else did. What others did, like people in the diaspora, the contributions they made and all of that. That's fine. But there are so many people who have contributed to the initiation and development of democratic order in our country in their very quiet ways. And I think I would want to say that every Gambian, whether you lived in the diaspora or within the country, has contributed in some measure. So to me, it doesn't make sense for me to highlight what I did, because that is not measurable in terms of what
for the sake of history and for the young people that are watching, it's important. Professionals like yourself, until this day we are hearing it, starting even from the president, but where were the professionals? Where are the professionals that are coming to take position on this? So people are asking these questions. So a lot of the professionals like yourself might be, or you might even have been in the British Virgin Islands, and then you have people in the legal system that have been calling you for advice advice. Maybe there are things you did when you came in the country or they came outside the country, or you might have worked with some international organizations, because we all know, obviously, a lot of international organizations did a lot of things behind the scenes in trying to help indirectly get the dictatorship out. So maybe you have contributed in some of those ways, and it's important to know for the sake of history.
You see, one of the things I try to discourage is trying to make a distinction amongst ourselves as Gambians in terms of who was for what, who has done what, who hasn't done what, because that can only draw a wedge between us as a people. To me, that doesn't make sense. But the other factor is that I prefer to concentrate on things that unite us rather than the things that divide us as a people.
But how would that be dividing, though? Just saying this is what I did.
No, but you see, I'm conscious of the role I'm in now, not only as chairman of the CRC, but also as justice of the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And I have to. I'm not privileged, if I can put it that way, to see things that you or somebody else might ordinarily not worry about. We have our own rules, we have our own strictures and things like that. That doesn't mean you don't want to speak the truth. Obviously, you
So
speak
you
the
are
truth.
safeguarding your position?
It's not a safeguarding the position. It's more about ensuring that the system, as envisaged constitutionally and in practice, works. And obviously, one has to be careful about certain pronouncements you make, and you don't want to get into debates, that that are not fitting.
You don't want to be taken off the bus, right?
It's not so much about being taken off the bus. I think I see myself as a professional, and I'm not so much worried about security of my tenure. That has never been my worry, frankly speaking. I think it's more about preserving the institution. And I think in a newfound democracy, we have to make sure that we build very strong institutions, and we have that level of decorum consistent with the institutions that we represent, because that is how, in my view, we build not only the integrity of the institution, but how we build public confidence in the institution. And I think we have to be mindful about things like that.
You are watching the Nyohobai Show on the Gambian Talents TV. QC Justice Cherno Jallow is my guest today. Fast forward in 2017, the CRC came. The Gambia decided we needed a new constitution, and you were appointed the chairperson. The first question the first thing that a lot of people talk about is, I'm sick and tired of new governments coming in, and every new government, this is the third government Gambia has had in 52 years, and every new government that comes in would have to establish or come up with a new constitution. People are tired of that. What is your reaction to, what do you think about that? Yes, this one came and you are appointed, and there is hope that it will be the last one. But what is your opinion? What do you think about that opinion of people, the people who think, well, Gambia will continue to do this, changing constitutions every time?
I respect people who express those opinions, and I respect their opinions. And the reason is simple. People generally will speak out of experience. And that's what is happening. And people are relaying their experience to what they are seeing happening now, and beginning to wonder whether it will be any different. And it's a logical way of arguing things. But I don't think it's a question of every new government coming in creating a new constitution. When in 1965 we had our independence, we have the Gambia Constitution order, which basically laid the foundation for independence and for self-government. All right. When we became a Republican, when we decided to, assume a Republican status as a country, obviously that necessitated a new constitution. So in my view, that was the only new constitution. What we had back in 1997 was not a normal situation, in my view. It was a military takeover, which was completely at odds with democratic systems and values. So it was an imposed system, as it were, in that particular context. So from 1979, one can argue that yes, we had we had, 3 constitutions, and now we probably are building building a new one. But in reality, the way I see it, on the normal democratic settings, it's only 2 constitutions: 1970 Constitution, and this one we are preparing now. Yeah.
Okay. Well, a lot of people also argue that, well, instead of coming up with a new constitution, couldn't there have been adjustments? And this is people talking.
Yeah.
Couldn't there have been adjustments in the already existing constitution? Look at some of the laws that we think need to be changed and just change those and move on. Why does it have to be a completely new constitution?
I've had those submissions as well, but let's look at it from this perspective. We had the 1997 Constitution, and that Constitution, when the draft was presented at the time, the junta did amend the Constitution, but people did not have the privilege of seeing the original Constitution.
Okay.
But where I sit today, as chairman of the CRC, I can tell you there have been a lot of adjustments to the original draft.
Okay.
All right. And since then, the adopted constitution, which is the one we have now, there have been over 50 amendments in the constitution, to the extent certain people were not sure which amendments were right and which were not right. Take a typical example of Section 1 of the constitution, which declares that the Gambia is a sovereign state. There was an attempt to amend the constitution to amend that section, declaring the Gambia is a sovereign secular state.
Okay.
So the word secular was introduced. That was challenged before the Supreme Court, which declared it unconstitutional. But if you get a copy of the constitution today from the government, from the printer, it has the word secular in it. Okay. Which has been declared unconstitutional. And we have I think we got to a stage where we had different versions of the constitution. Nobody really was so certain, except probably within the legal circle, as to which represents the true constitution of our country. I think the mere fact that
there are a lot of discrepancies from the draft and
the initial draft and so what happened.
The same process was followed. Consultation with the public across the country, the whole thing. With
the 1997 Constitution, what I'm aware of, there was consultation within the country, but not on a massive scale, as we are embarked upon at the moment. And because when we went around the country, a lot of people were telling me they never really experienced anything like the one we were doing. So the level of public consultation was not as high as the one now, but nevertheless there was public consultation. So ultimately, we find ourselves in a situation where we have a constitution that has been tampered with so many times that when you come to the current dispensation now, where we are saying, okay, we can reform the constitution, and take the argument you just proffered that why don't we just amend? You are talking about series of amendments. That's really going to be quite extensive. So ultimately, is it not better that we revise the entire constitution, come up with a new one, where Gambians are involved, and there's complete inclusivity in the design and development of the constitution, so that ultimately we have a constitution that Gambians can take ownership of and call their own, and it will be a constitution, hopefully, and this is what we all are hoping and working towards, that it will be a constitution that will last for generations to come, rather than continue this process of amending constitution every now and then.
Coming to your appointment and the appointment of your commissioners, some people argue that it wasn't fair. Some would say it was politically motivated, favoritism was involved. What is your reaction to people who feel that way?
Without meaning to be disrespectful, and I respect my compatriots a lot, sometimes we have a tendency to talk too much without the facts, and that's a dangerous thing. And we see the trend built in the country, and it's something we need to be very mindful of as a people. It doesn't unite us, it divides us more and more, particularly when we speak without the facts. The fact of the matter is that it was the legislature under the Constitution that enacted the CRC Act. Now, it was now the government's responsibility to practicalize what the legislature has had enacted, you know, and that process, as in my view, was followed, you know, and there were arguments somewhere saying, oh, the president is the one who nominates, but it's the AG who nominated. But the reality is, the president relies on people to carry out his work. So that responsibility was given to the Honorable Attorney General, but those people were nominees of the Attorney General. What kind of favoritism are we talking about? Unless they say that we are not qualified.
Yes, the qualification part from what we have discussed here is left to our viewers. For example, now from what we've established, George, if you qualify or not from your experience, going to school and studying it, and also practicing it not only in Gambia but outside of Gambia with the success you've had. But then now when it comes to the connection, people will say, okay, is he the most qualified Gambian? There are several other Gambians who've probably had more experience than him, who have been in the system a lot longer than him. Are you related to Barrow in any way, shape or form? Did you know Barrow prior to now?
Until I met the president during my swearing in on the 4th of June 2018. Okay. I never met him, I never knew him, apart from what I saw and read in the media. So we are not in any way related. What the law provided is that as chairperson, the chairperson is nominated by the Chief Justice. It's the Chief Justice, so it vests the discretion in the Chief Justice to exercise that power. The Chief Justice exercised that power and nominated me, just as the other laws have vested powers in the Chief Justice to nominate other judges to serve in different capacities. So at some level, whether in the Constitution or in statute, public officers are vested with discretion. And to me, that is not the issue. The issue is whether those discretions or those discretionary powers were judiciously exercised. And I know, unless somebody finds it otherwise,
obviously has the power to say no, though. It doesn't matter what the Chief Justice says, it doesn't matter what he comes up with. He can say Cherno, Jallow, and the president says no, I want Abu Bakar Tambedu, or I want...
No, the president can say I wanted... Under the law, the president couldn't say I want Abu Bakar Tambedu. Well, Abu Bakar Tambedu could not say, but could not say I want Pa Usman, or somebody else. That provision, that power was vested in the Chief Justice, just like the power was vested in the Attorney General to nominate the Vice Chairperson, and then power is vested in the President to nominate the remaining members of the Constitutional Review Commission. I've been asked this question before, that was the Constitutional Review Commission properly established? And I said, whoever has issue with it knows what to do. It's not for me to defend my appointment. It's not for any commissioner to defend his or her appointment. I think we have to be realistic about this. The one thing you see...
but if you know something was not done the right way...
But what was it that wasn't done the right way?
If something was not done the right way and you are privy to it, you said, I'm just saying hypothetically, you said that it is not your position or the commissioner's position to defend their appointment. But if something was done in appointing you and you knew it was wrong, you would not still bother?
No, quite clearly. Quite clearly. The fact of the matter is, if any one of us was convinced that we were not properly appointed in accordance with the law, I think we would have made that clear. We would have made it known. Because if you don't, sooner or later it becomes an issue, and it becomes very embarrassing. In an exercise like the one we are embarked upon, huge public resources would have been expended, and it all could have come to naught. You don't want that. As a professional, you don't do that. When something happens and you are engaged in it, and you realize that the proper processes were not followed, proper procedure wasn't followed, you make that known, so that can be rectified. But in this situation, I did not find any, none of my commissioners found anything legally wrong in the way it is. But these were opinions held by a few people.
Okay, now just for sake of clarity, you've been gone for, let's say, a period of about 20 years or thereabout. During this period, did you have any connection to the Gambian Judicial? Just, I mean, talking from a layman's perspective, I don't know. Did you
Well,
ask a
obviously,
question?
I'm a legal practitioner,
Okay.
enrolled and as a member of the Gambia Bar Association. So, insofar as that is
So
concerned,
even
yes.
if you
If,
leave, you are still
oh yes,
considered a member of the bar.
yeah,
You can always come back and
yeah,
practice.
obviously,
Okay.
you know, I can always do that because I'm already enrolled.
Not you alone. I'm just
Yeah.
saying general for those of us who don't know yet.
Generally,
So anybody who leaves once you are
generally,
enrolled
it's just
in the
that
bar.
the way the system is now. I mean, you have, in order to practice, you have to pay for your practicing certificate. You know, every year. No, that is standard. But in terms of your qualification to practice law in the country, once you're enrolled, that's it.
Okay.
You know? So I've never been disengaged. I've never been disengaged in
So
the
being a
process.
justice, I mean, this is one of the justices in the country. At what point did you assume or were you appointed?
I was appointed back in May of 2017. It was as a justice of the Supreme Court, and you know, as you know, the Supreme Court you know, sits in sessions. It means that we don't sit all the time. You know, the reforms being carried out by the Honorable Chief Justice is that eventually that's where we will get we will get to where you have you know, a Supreme Court that sits throughout the year. But even outside of the session, normal sessions now, which are twice a year, we do sit regularly every quarter.
Okay.
Yeah, so and we try to, and if urgent matters come where we need to sit, obviously that discretion still vests in the Chief Justice to convene the court.
Are there any foreigners in the justice now? I mean, this year was a big concern during the IJMS time, and yeah, still do we have foreigners? They were usually, in fact, they were the dominating, they dominated the justice at the time. Now, do we have any foreigners in the justice?
We have two colleagues, one from Nigeria in the name of Justice Yahya, and another from Sierra Leone in the name of Justice Brown Mark. And I can tell you, these are talented and highly professional, ethical judges as far as my experience and my relationship with them goes. And yes, we've gone through bad experiences as a country with some persons within the judicial circle and the legal circle as well. But I think that's something that is well known and everybody's, you know, trampling care.
So more or less, it is not true that Gambians are not competent to run our own judiciary. That is not the reality.
Absolutely
right?
that. Absolutely that.
We have
Gambians,
qualified
Gambians, I can tell you, we can even fill the Supreme Court today with Gambians purely. Obviously, you know, getting the right people to agree to leave what they are doing, to join the judiciary, public service is the concern. But are there competent Gambians? Absolutely, we have them in large numbers, certainly. So I wouldn't say that we don't. But also, you see, there's some value in having some of these, you know, judges from, you know, brother countries, sister countries. You know, they bring a certain level of expertise and a certain level of experience, which cross-fertilizes with our own experiences and our own systems and so on. So we learn, we become better. You know, so it doesn't. I think what we should be concerned about is whether, as a judiciary, we are being independent, you know, and nobody's interfering with our work. And I can tell you, for now, that is the case.
I was going to ask you, how independent is the Gambian judiciary this minute?
This minute, I'll tell you very honestly, as far as I know, and I can speak, I believe I can speak with candor on this, certainly, as with other issues we've discussed. It is very independent. I haven't seen so far and haven't heard any form of interference, whether from the executive, the legislature, or from any other court. I think we do need to recognize that in a way we are transitioning. Because we've had scars in the past, we've had a lot of bad experiences, and we are coming out of that. So obviously, it will take a while for the public to have that absolute confidence that, look, at the judiciary is truly independent. But as we speak today, the judiciary, in my view, is very much independent and highly professional in terms of the work we do.
Okay. Just for the sake of the layman who may not know, how many judges are sitting at the Supreme Court at this minute, and what is their role? I mean, before we fast forward again.
Well, there are five Gambian judges on the Supreme Court, with the two outside judges.
Makes it seven.
That makes it seven. But under that concept, we need a quorum of five.
Okay.
So the Gambian judges can sit. And
the quorum don't have to be Gambian judges.
No, in fact, the process the Chief Justice has put in place is that we are moving gradually to Gambianizing the entire judiciary. These support mechanisms are important for that transition to properly occur. Everybody recognizes that. So in most of the cases now, gradually, it's these five Gambian judges that sit over them. Yes, the foreign judges
are not able to make
even if the two are not able to make it.
Do they live in the country or they come over?
They come over during the sessions.
Okay.
They come over during the sessions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and what is the role of the Supreme Court?
The role of the Supreme Court is the final appellate body that hears appeals from the Court of Appeal, and that is where everything ends. And it's a very important court, one that is always mindful that it is the last resort, and therefore has to be extremely careful in terms of how we dispense justice to ensure that ultimately the right thing is done. But also, it is the institution that primarily is responsible for building the jurisprudence, of our country, and the appeals that come to the court obviously are dealt with within that particular context. But the court also has original jurisdiction in some matters like election petitions. For parliamentary and presidential elections, they go straight to the Supreme Court.
So they come straight.
They come straight to the Supreme Court.
So it is your batch of justices or judges who actually decided over the few cases we had during the last election.
Well, remember those matters didn't proceed, but yes, the petitions were there, and yes, I can't remember the quorum now, frankly speaking. I think we had foreign judges sitting on them as well at the time. But obviously, as you know, those matters did not proceed. And even if they proceeded, I wouldn't have told you how we all did it.
Okay. Like so what are some of the cases that you guys sat on, let's say, the past year or this year?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily want to discuss any specific cases. I think, obviously, as a judiciary, we hear appeals and we hear a lot of applications as well, and we deal with them as they come. And are there many? Yes. When we came in, I think we had something in the region of about 40 cases on appeal. But by the second session, we were able to dispose of nearly all of them.
Okay.
So it was a very tough period, but we needed to get rid of the backlog, because otherwise you have more appeals coming and then things develop and so on. But I think Gambians can feel comfortable, and I'm sure the Chief Justice wouldn't mind me saying this, that we are doing the utmost we can. The judiciary, obviously, where we stand, we are not perfect as an institution, coming from the history that we've all had. But I think the collective effort under the wise leadership of our Chief Justice is getting us there, especially with support from the executive and the legislature. And I think with the new constitution, hopefully, that can be reinforced. Because we have to understand that no democracy works. Not democracy works the way it should. If the institution with responsibility for adjudicating disputes, is not independent, is not functioning, and the judiciary is the last bastion of hope for the average man on the street and for every Gambian for that matter. And people need to have confidence in that institution. So otherwise, it could lead to breakdown of
your salary. How many millions are you guys paid? It must be good. The check must
don't join those. Don't join those Gambians that keep speculating about.
You must be getting paid a lot of millions. Gambian taxpayers, huh?
For sitting
twice a year.
You know what? I find one thing in our country, and it is bothering me. It is generally bothersome because it's becoming a culture. That whatever you do, whoever you appoint, whatever position you create, the first thing we think about is the money.
The money,
The first thing we think about is the money.
But the money is important.
I worked
because
in
it's taxpayers,
I
you know,
no listen
the ordinary
listen
people working hard
look
on
here.
their farms.
Taxpayers, the very people who are appointed are also taxpayers.
Yes.
You need these institutions to work. The reason we've been having difficulty Gambianizing the judiciary entirely at the moment is because of those elements. I mean, people have to be properly remunerated. Let's face it.
Yes.
I mean, when you sit there, you start thinking about how much somebody earns. You really start changing your democratic system. I worked in the British Virgin Islands as Attorney General, a foreigner, and I was the highest paid civil servant.
Okay.
Better paid than the premier of the country.
Okay.
Better paid than any other minister in the government. And it was never an issue. It was never an issue.
Yeah, but
because
the
no,
Gambia is the fact that these things are barely put out there for the people to know. The sensitization part is very important for the public to know that some offices, in order for them not to be corrupted, the pay should be very decent. Because if not, you will be giving room for corruption. Don't you think a better job should be done in sensitizing the people to know these things, and for these things to also be made public? Because it's the public's money that is used to pay these positions. And I personally think judges and lawmakers should be paid and paid like a good amount of money. That way they will not be corrupted to do certain things. Don't you think so?
Civic education is important. I think the public needs to learn and know a lot about government and government systems, and they need to know about the Constitution, they need to know a lot about the other laws and so on. That's fine. But you see, one has to be very careful, and I'm being very realistic here. When you put somebody's salary out there, take our society. Let's be realistic here. Let's put emotions outside.
We're in America.
All right?
Yeah,
No, we are in America, but typical.
It's public.
No, but American society is different from Gambian society. Let's face it.
Well, a lot of countries in Africa too, though.
No, let's face it. I'm all for transparency. I'm all for transparency. But one has to be careful that you do not elevate that to a level where you compromise an individual's privacy, which is also a constitutional right. All right? The fact of the matter is the government is the one that prepares the budget, the estimates that outline, pay of everybody, and so on. So in a way, it is public, maybe not accessible to everybody. But what I want to emphasize is not so much about the pay. It's not so much about what is public and what is not public. And what needs to be public, I subscribe to the view that it needs to be made public. I don't have issue with that. But I think it's the emotion that we build into this that creates a problem, that creates a wedge between us as Gambians. It's not only about family members. I think it's about people judging others, and we Gambians are very good at judging people. I don't think we do a good job of it. Right? Exactly. And people say a lot of things, but you have to understand. People work hard. There are those who may be corrupt. That's a reality. There are those who may be corrupt. But generally, people work very hard. And the time expended, and the energy, and everything that goes into it, people don't just seem to disregard that completely. I think as a country, if we must move forward, transparency is important. All right? Nobody can argue with that. Civic education is important, so people are aware. That is important. But at the same time, what we don't normally emphasize, which we need to emphasize, is that we need to stop castigating people who hold offices, because it is affecting and it will continue to affect the way we function as a country, as a government, because the people, because the right people who could assume those roles and do a wonderful job for our country will shy away. They will definitely say,
I feel your point.
Yeah, and we don't need that. What we need are genuine professional individuals, people who are incorruptible, people who will assume the position and do the job. I mean, Gambians sacrifice so much for their country. But what do they get for
I
it?
agree with your point, and I would like us to move on. But then, if we would both agree on the civic education part, it's very important because you see, there's this big problem in our country. Information is lagging. People don't have information, and when people are not educated, when people don't know, they tend to assume. And it is those assumptions that are creating all these problems, because at the end of the day, a lot of speculations will be there, here and there. So our government and our institutions as a country, we need to do a lot better in trying to educate people to know certain things, and that way I think a lot of these problems will be taken care of, because we need competent people, and I think you will agree with me on that.
Yeah, Pasman, I agree with you 100% on that. I think when you withhold information, you create room for speculation.
Yes.
And that degenerates into something else that is undesirable.
Yes.
I agree entirely with that. I think we need open government. I think we need more transparent, behavior in the way we govern ourselves as a people and as a government in particular. And I think we need to be honest, about ourselves, and about each other and our country. I think anything we do less in any of these areas is affecting our development as a country. And we need to understand that, corrupt behavior will take us nowhere. It will take us nowhere. It has never taken any country anywhere. One may even say the Gambia is the easiest country to develop. But obviously that has to be benchmarked on certain principles.
Right.
Honesty, transparency, inclusiveness, professionalism, and all of those attributes. Those are important. And it's the people who are appointed to certain positions that need to demonstrate that. During the public consultations, we've had, in the country, we've had a lot of opinions expressed about confidence in government. And I know I said this before, and somebody wasn't happy about it. But I made absolutely no apology for it, because it is the truth of what we be. I mean, it is the truth that people said those things to us. We find ourselves in a situation where the Gambian public, generally, I'm not saying entirely, generally, the Gambian public seems to have lost faith in government as an institution. I said this before, and it didn't go down well. But again, this is our honest assessment as the CRC, based on our interactions with the Gambian public. This is what they've been telling us, And some people even said to us, "Look here, you have written the Constitution. You're just going through the motion."
Okay.
It shows you the level of distrust that they have, and that there has to be a reason for it. So rather than criticize those people,
honestly, just this morning before I came here, I talked to somebody that is very close to me, and I told them I'm having an interview with you, like they just wasted their time. Even you guys coming here, there are people who share those notions that they'll just, in fact, the person didn't understand. It will just be another thing that just goes and sit on the president's desk. I'm like, this is a completely different story from the Jallow Commission, and we'll talk about that. The Jallow Commissions and all other commissions and what they did. So they think, okay, you're just wasting taxpayers' money coming to stay in nice hotels, flying, getting per diems, and all of these cool things, or going across the country, and that's what people believe. But anyway, we fast forward to the CRC. What was the first thing you did when you were appointed chairman? I will assume you were the first person that was appointed in the commission, right?
No, we were all appointed at the same time, and we were sworn the same day.
Sworn in the same day. Okay, so what was the first thing you did?
And the first thing we did, obviously, as soon as we were sworn in, and the Honorable Attorney General, Minister of Justice, was extremely supportive of the establishment of the CRC. He immediately allowed us access to use his conference room. Remember, we didn't have any offices, we didn't have any support staff. Well, we decided we had a mandate. We have a mandate of only 18 months, and we started meeting the following day.
Okay.
All right. That was the 5th. And at that point, we mapped out our strategies in terms of areas we need to focus on in order to ensure that the institution is properly established. And we started developing our strategy documents on communication, on the documentation, on the what do you call it, and on education. And so many other areas. And whilst at the same time mapping out the process for the selection of a secretary who will head the secretariat and be the support and the support to the commission. So we laid out all those processes, and at the same time we started developing questions which culminated in the issues document, because we realized that in order to be able to engage Gambians meaningfully, we need to at least put something to them.
Yes.
Let them see.
Give them a skeleton.
Give them some idea, exactly, and so on. And that took us a while, and we spent a lot of long hours, developing those and so on.
And then everybody have a background, all the commissioners have a background in law and justice?
No, not everybody there is a lawyer, and not everybody needs to be a lawyer.
A lawyer,
because
just for the sake of the layman, it's important for these things to be known.
Absolutely. I think what we need to understand is that the Constitution, as an instrument itself, is legal in nature, but the process leading to the design and its design and development doesn't necessarily have to be purely legalistic or purely comprised of legal minds. There is so much that non-lawyers can bring to the table, and we are seeing that during this public consultations that lawyers may not even know. So I think having the non-lawyers in the commission has brought in a wealth of experience, whereby we can look at things differently, and look at it sometimes from a layman's perspective. So it's really, a good balance where you have a mix of lawyers and non-lawyers, in the CRC.
Okay. So after you establish all of that, the consultation was the next step you took, or did you
after that, we had to recruit the staff, of course. We had to recruit the staff. We established the secretariat, and government was very supportive, and as was our development partners, namely the UNDP and International IDEA. They've been extremely supportive, and once we put the issues document out, we published that, I think, in October. Or maybe September, I can recall now. Once we published that, the next phase for us was the internal public consultations, which we started in early November.
Okay. So you, one thing I like is involving young people. I mean, I'm a person for young people inclusion, and you guys seem to include young people a lot in the CRC administration and the like, especially in the area of the media, which is very good. What prompted this decision to include young people, and not only young people, even women are very much involved with the CRC. It's not like an all male dominated and of course mucky. Male koto
absolutely.
But there are young people and there are women. I mean, what prompted that decision?
One of the strategy documents we had to prepare was the one relating to public consultations. It was a question: how do we consult, and not merely consulting, but doing it successfully? And we came up with two ideas. And the first was, in order to ensure a successful internal public consultations, we needed a pre-consultation with the governors, with the chiefs, and with the women representatives, youth representatives, and so on, because these were basically the heads of the constituents in those respective areas, and we could not do it successfully all by ourselves, so we needed partners. So we did that. Where 1 week we traveled around the country and met all of these people, in their various areas. And that worked out well, and we got their buy-in, we got their partnership. So that was one. The second one was, okay, if we are going on the actual public consultation, how can we do it with a measure of success as with the pre-consultation? The first thing we decided was, look, not every Gambian really knows about the Constitution. Don't go there. We can't go there talking about the Constitution that they don't know anything about. So we had discussions with the National Council for Civic Education, which under the Constitution have responsibility for civic education, and they were willing to come in. So we had a memorandum of understanding with them and partnered with them, whereby they would be the advanced party to go around the country to discuss constitution, constitutional review processes, and the fact that we were coming and what to expect from us. So, and that worked out well. It set the pace. So by the time we went out now to consult, the foundation had already been established, and people knew what the issues were even before we raised them. So we had that very meaningful dialogue. So it worked out pretty well. And also because of the nature of our society, there are certain realities that we always must confront.
Yes.
We said, okay, we'll have the plenary meetings where everybody comes together, you know, older people, the women, the youth, people with disability, and so on. But then we will have that for a period, and then we will break into sessions. The men will be by themselves, we'll have the women by themselves, the youth by themselves, and people with disability will also be provided with that facility. And that worked out perfectly. Because in some societies, and you have to understand that
some people who could be at the same level.
At the same level.
Youth talking to youth,
exactly.
women talking to women.
And that was
people that could relate.
That was exactly what we did.
Okay.
And you know, you'll be surprised. In some plenaries, women spoke and spoke very well.
Okay.
But in some, they were very quiet and didn't want to say anything. And you can understand the conservative nature of some of our communities, and that's just the reality. But when they were divided into focus groups, I mean, the passion was high, and they spoke. So they were well represented. And I remember when we went to one of those communities, I think it was Janjambure, and we already had our focus group discussions and everything was done. And when we were ready to go, we were looking around for one of our commissioners, our youth commissioner. Okay. Just to realize that he had a group of youths and students
hanging out with,
and talking to them and raising issues with them in addition to all other issues.
Okay.
You know, and that was really so impressive. And we had to wait for him to finish what he was doing, because youths had been involved in this process. And we've also, during the internal consultations, been engaging the schools in the areas we've been to.
Okay.
You know, where we would send a commissioner and some, you know, staff to go and talk to students at the senior secondary level. And the level of engagement was superb. You know, so it just shows that generally what Gambians needed was not so much the law, but it was to be consulted, to be included in the process.
Inclusion is very important.
It is very important.
Exactly.
I mean, we've been to communities where people have said to us, you know, we appreciate you coming here and talking to us in our bantabas. Even if you don't take on board what we have said, the fact that you came here and talked to us, that was great. You did not come here to validate a constitution. You came here to include us as part of the process of designing and developing one. So it just shows you that people really appreciate being included. And I remember in one of the communities again, somebody saying to us, you know, this is the first time I'm sitting down for a long period discussing and learning about the Constitution. I used to hear it and never knew what it was. Now I know how it affects my life. I would want the same conversation with the same group next year and the years after.
That is very important.
So again, if emphasize the point you raised earlier about civic education. So it's important.
Very important.
We need to include our people. And I will say this. You know, we are going through this constitutional review phase. We need to go. We need to look beyond this. It doesn't mean that once the constitution is drafted and submitted, everything should come to a stop. Civic education must continue.
It's the most important thing.
We must continue to consult our people on key legislative measures. Key legislative measures that affect their lives, their way of life, their values, you know, as communities, they need to be consulted. Other countries do it. Why can't we do it?
I agree very well that the world is moving to a direction where democracy is very important, and people, Gambia, need to grow and be part of this process actually, because it's very important for us to be at that level where people should take their own destinies into their own hands. They should be involved in what is happening versus just making decisions for them and they just follow and accept whatever you are telling them. So it's very important. So you're doing this, you're going to the different communities, you went to the length and breadth of the country. What were some of those key issues that Gambians are very passionate about that they would like to see in their constitution?
A host of things, but I'll just cite a few that stand out very clearly. The first thing is Gambians don't want a president who stays there indefinitely. I'll tell you that. I mean, I think Gambians are unanimous.
But since when though? They've been praying for president to be there for 1,000 years. They are the ones that have told Jawara.
Remember what?
They are the ones that told Jawara, begged Jawara to stay in 1991 or 92. Yahya Jammeh was almost made a king and was called Babli Mansa. We are seeing the trend with Adama Barrow now. So, but in reality, though, this is what you guys found out.
Yeah, I think in reality, like I said before, people speak out of experience as well, in addition to other things. And people generally are saying that we do not need a president that's just going to sit there forever.
Okay.
And they want a term limit. Even as we had at yesterday's meeting, there was no dissenting voice on the issue of term limit. And the law also, the CRC Act also makes it very clear that one of the things we should take into account is the term limit. So generally people are conscious of that. And like I said,
at the local grassroots level?
More at the local grassroots level that you would have expected. And so that one stood out. The other one that stood out is, again, we have a unanimous position on this basically, is that the Chief Justice must always be a Gambian. And the arguments people are putting across is that it's our own that will know our problems, it's our own that will have mercy on us. I don't know how true that is, but at least that's how the people are thinking. So they do not want a non-Gambian ever becoming Chief Justice. So that's almost unanimous across the board. Then there is the issue relating to assets declaration, where we also see near unanimity. Because again, people generally feel that, and they are not limiting this to the presidency or to cabinet ministers. They are saying that this should be across the board in respect of all key government positions, that people need to know what they have, by the time they assume office, and also how much they have by the time they exit their office. And again, it comes down to issue of transparency and trust. People feel that they need to have trust and confidence in their leaders. And when I say leaders, I'm not only talking about political leaders. It's about everybody who assumes a key position, because that's where the example has to be set.
Absolutely.
So that has been a concern for them. Obvious transparency is important, and one of the things that people have brought out is okay, we need to encourage whistleblowing, but we need to go beyond that and protect whistleblowers. Obviously, it's a very, very dicey subject, but one again which reflects, the whole issue relating to accountability of persons, holding public office. So generally, there are opinions on those. There are areas where we obviously need to do assessments based on the totality of the information we collect, and those relate to the education and qualification of key, office holders, maybe president, cabinet ministers, parliamentarians. So those are issues there. The mode of appointing people and so on. The one area where we are concerned initially, but now understand why people feel that way, is where people feel that the presidency, and I'm not talking about President Adama Barrow, is the presidency as an institute, as an office, feel that it should be divested of all powers.
Okay.
Yes, and at some point we sat back and said, okay, wait. This is supposed to be the most important office in a democratic dispensation. If you make it so unattractive, really, which credible person will buy for it? So I think But the way,
what is the
it's the,
motive or the reason behind
I think again it's the frustration of the people generally in government and government, the way things are run, and I think what the people generally are calling for is not so much the way we are seeing. It's not so much about divesting the president completely of powers, but about creating, checks and balances, and also ensuring that we create institutions that are solid. Because
rather than individual
being able to
law
appoint, dismiss, at will and things like that.
There is no security for
Security of tenure.
anything.
Yes.
Okay.
So people are concerned. People are generally concerned about that. So, which is why these public consultations are helpful, because people are giving us the rationale for their thinking, and when we sit down and think about, say, okay, that makes sense. Then by the time you are digested, that somebody comes with a counter position and tells you, okay, you need to consider this check. How are you going to balance this against that opinion? And then it gets you thinking again, okay, now we have a very solid counter position. So it enables us to create that balance. See
now,
where sense lies.
Give us an example of how the whole process works. The secretariat was established, commissioners were sworn in, secretariat established, you got to work, did public consultation. Walk us through the process of what is going to happen. Eventually, you will write a constitution that will be submitted to the National Assembly referendum. How will the whole process work? Just walk us through the process until the final stage. Before we have, okay, here is the 2021 Constitution of God. When is it even supposed to be due? Is it 2021? Is when we expect to have a new constitution?
Well, let me come to that. Obviously, that's outside of our hands. Okay. But what we are doing now, obviously, is following a process, and the process is important.
Yes. So tell us because the beginning to the end.
Because
where we start.
Because the process lends credibility to what we do. We are now at the stage where we are consulting with Gambians and other stakeholders, and other stakeholders being maybe institutions and non-Gambian individuals or institutions that are interested in our democratic governance. And so we are looking at those. We have a team that is looking at the collecting and collating and analyzing that information, so that when it comes to issues of death penalty, okay, how many people said retain death penalty in this community that we went to, and things like that. What level of participation in terms of numbers and so on is representative of public opinion on this? What is the dissenting view? So we are going through that phase. Ultimately, it's going to be it's a difficult and very time-consuming and very intensive.
So at every stage, you will consider the majority of people who said what about a particular.
We will look at it. You see, part of what we do is read body language in the communities we visit, and that includes the external diaspora. If, for example, we have 3-4 people say abolish death penalty, and we hear no counter argument, the presumption is that everybody agrees with it. So obviously, we have developed a methodology as to how we are going to determine public opinion, and we're still working on refining that to make sure that we do the right thing. So once that is done, then as a commission, this is more for the commissioners, we will sit down, and this work is actually ongoing because we meet regularly when we are home and so on. Then we will sit down and map out what needs to go into the new constitution and what cannot make it into the new constitution. Because as somebody rightly said at yesterday's meeting, if you want to put everything in the constitution, it's going to be so voluminous, and that's not what the constitution is supposed to be. It was going to be my
next question, where several countries have 20 pages, less than 30 pages in their constitution. The Gambia has over 100 pages in our constitution.
But I think that, to me, I think that's the wrong yardstick to use, in the sense that countries' constitutions are not developed in a vacuum. You develop it within a particular setting. For example, we have gone through a history. So if you are building a new constitution, are you going to assume certain things that ordinarily other countries would assume in developing their constitution?
No, but then
these are the things.
But the general argument would be those countries are bigger, probably been longer than Gambia, have a lot more experience and things in their countries than Gambia did, in America, for example, or Nigeria, for example, or even our neighboring Senegal. In terms of population size and history, in every way, they may have it richer than us.
Our histories are still different. I'm not saying that we are going to have a constitution that's going to be massive. I just don't believe that the benchmark being used is accurate.
Okay.
I think every country, in terms of designing and developing a constitution, has to be built on within the context of the country itself. What the people of the Gambia might consider as paramount to them, as representing their bread and butter, may not necessarily be the same with America or with Senegal. So we have to be considerate. That's why I'm always very careful, and we at the Commission are extremely careful about using others as a yardstick in order to design things for ourselves. Otherwise, what's the point to the public consultations? So I think ultimately what is important is that we recognize that the Constitution is supposed to be a framework. It cannot address everything. A number of other issues may need to be addressed in statutes. Some may need to be, as a matter of policy, to be designed and implemented. So there are many other variables that need to be taken into account in this process. But for us, and again coming from the history we've had, from the time of independence to date, we need to determine from these public consultations what are key for the people. We say separation of powers, and everybody says separation of powers. Exactly what does it mean? We have to sit down and say, okay, this is what it means in the Gambian context. Do we mean complete separation? Or is it that we have to build strong institutions in order to promote the democratic governance of our country and show stability and show respect for the rule of law? So these are all elements we need to look at. And that is where the emphasis comes in terms of specific subject matters and areas. So ultimately, is it going to be a lean constitution? That's what we hope for. But I'm not going to define the constitution by page numbers. I think that is the wrong premise.
Fair enough. In your consultation, you've met with several stakeholders, encourage people to send in, you call it concept papers, or
opinions.
Yes, and the like. You have gone to the length and breadth of the country and have met with the ordinary Gambians. You have met also with the politicians and stuff. About a month ago, thereabout, you guys had a session with the different political party leaders and stuff. We are surprised to hear that you've asked the political parties to actually submit written paper of whatever they think of the Constitution, and surprisingly, it was only Joy who submitted their opinions or whatever they think of the Constitution in paper. Is that true?
At the time, it wasn't Doi only. I mean, the UDP also submitted papers, and I think the PPP also submitted a paper. Yes, we didn't hear from the GDC. Did tell us at that meeting that they submitted a paper, but when we checked, we never received it, and we asked them to resubmit it. And then we take a look, and we encourage others to do it. Obviously, the political parties are important in this process. We need to know their thoughts because everybody is going to be affected. And we are consulting with everybody possible because ultimately what we do not want as a country and as a people is to have a constitution where everybody will eventually say, no, I was never consulted. So this needs to be out. We consult with everybody and we tell them, frankly, tell us. Which is why we met the executive, we met the legislative, judicial, everybody.
So what was important to the politicians, the political parties? What was the key, most important?
It was not any different, frankly speaking, from some of the opinions we've had around the country. Obviously, they agree on some and they don't agree on some. Educational qualifications, some thought it was irrelevant, some thought it was. We've even had some people, some politicians tell us, look here, even a farmer can become president. You don't need academic qualifications. So I mean, there were different opinions that have been expressed. Like I said, I don't think they were too dissimilar
Okay.
I mean, obviously, somebody looking at what was being said will say, oh, that opinion coming from politician X is self-serving, but that's their opinion. And it's important that we allow people to express their opinions, whether they're self-serving or otherwise, because the position we occupy as CRC commissioner is to ensure objectivity in this process and also to ensure that the necessary checks and balances are created. But even more important, to look at subject matters that need to go into the Constitution to serve the present generation and future generations of Gambian in a manner whereby the Constitution will not become the subject of ping pong, at the political or other circles. But if I can go back on the process, you asked me what happens right to the end. Once we finish with the analysis and take decisions on matters that need to go into the Constitution, we prepare drafting instructions. We've established 5 technical committees. And one of those technical committees is the Committee of Experts on Constitutional Law, which is chaired by our Vice Chairperson, and also the Committee on Constitution Drafting and Report Writing. These are 2 very key committees. So they will analyze work that comes from the CRC and the other technical committees on education, media, and land environment, as well as on public finance management. And within this committee, technical, we have experts, Gambian, some non-Gambian, who bring a wealth of experience into some of those issues. So we look forward to those reports and the recommendations. So that will lead to the designing and development of the new constitution. Then once we prepare the first draft of the constitution and the report, we will publish that.
The first draft?
The first draft.
Okay.
Of
draft
constitution and the report. Because
the report of the consultation.
Yeah, the report on the constitution, because that has to be read in tandem with the constitution.
Okay.
Because then people will understand, for example, why opinions they express have not found their way into it, or why certain opinions are in the constitution. And because I think people deserve to know, to know that. So that will be done, and then we will invite Gambians to look at the draft constitution and express their opinions.
Are you going back to do the same thing you just did?
On a very limited scale, and I'm not sure it will happen externally, because what we are looking for at that particular stage is for people to be able to read the Constitution and then give us their written opinions, on what they think. But also, we are taking a different approach.
It will be public, right?
Oh, it will be public. It will be public. Everything we do mostly is public. And then
I use the word mostly.
I say mostly because our proceedings are not public.
That's right.
No, it's important. It's important people know that, and I'm very guarded in terms of what I say. Then what is going to happen is that locally we need to take different approach, because we have a high illiteracy level within our country. So we will have public consultations within the country, but on a limited scale, where we let people know what is in the Constitution, so that people can grasp that and then express opinion on those matters. And those opinions will also guide us in terms of the final stages of the Constitution. And that final stage effectively is the revision of the first draft and finalization of it. And once we do that, then the final draft will be submitted to the president, who will obviously, the executive will take a look at it, and after that, the next phase will. Well, I don't think we should be that pessimistic. I don't think we should be that pessimistic. But beyond that, what will happen, obviously, the government will need to take the Constitution forward to the National Assembly through a bill for the National Assembly to endorse. And during that period, the CRC commissioners will be available to the National Assembly for consultation and anything like that. And the next logical stage after that will be the referendum referendum pursuant to the Constitution. The question you asked is, will this Constitution come into effect in 2020? And the answer is, I don't know. And I think it will be premature for me.
When does your mandate end? You have 18 months.
We have 18 months with the possibility of extension for 6 months. We are hoping we can finish it within the 18-month period. We are on target. We are on target for now, but obviously when we sit down and look at the totality of everything, we'll see whether anything is going to hold us back. But right now,
this is the last phase of the consultation.
This is the last phase of the consultation.
Okay. And how long is that going to last?
This consultation actually ends in early July. And I think we have 1 or 2 other meetings of stakeholders within the country, which shouldn't be an issue really. But so far we are on target, and we are hoping that we can finish it within the period. You must remember that all of us, 11 commissioners, we have our regular jobs. And this is not easy because we're still doing our regular jobs. We haven't taken a sabbatical. We're still doing our regular jobs in addition to doing this. And we meet weekends. Sometimes we work 7 days straight a week. Like when we started the internal internal public consultations, we went straight 14 days without a break.
Wow.
Consulting, and then people started getting sick, including myself. Then we had to change the strategy and so on. So it's really a very time-consuming process. But we all need to get back to our job. But that notwithstanding, we don't want to take any short-circuiting process insofar as the development of the new constitution.
So if your work finishes in 18 months, just for the sake of our viewers, the next step would be submitting it to the
president. And perhaps I should say this, under the CRC Act, once we submit the constitution, the draft constitution to the president and the report, we are entitled to publish it on the same day.
Oh, so it's not like the other.
It's not going to be like the 1997 constitution, like you submit it and then you don't know what, Gambians don't know what was submitted. No.
Or like in the case of the Janneh Commission, the president has to sit on the report and have 6 months to actually publish it or not publish it or decide whether it is.
I think that's in accordance with the current constitution. We must understand. And I don't want to comment on that because I have no nexus to that. But as far as I'm aware,
your commission is different in that sense. You're going to publish yours.
Ours is different.
Not him publishing.
No.
Because the Janneh Commission, the president has to publish.
Because that's a commission of inquiry. I think people need to understand the difference.
Okay. Yes.
A commission of inquiry follows a certain process. This one is not a commission of inquiry. This one is a commission established by statute and has specific mandates. And one of those is to publish the constitution, the draft constitution, and the report as soon as we hand it over to the president. And again, what's going to happen, Gambians will know what the final constitution looks like.
The submitted draft.
The submitted draft, what it looks like. And once we submit the draft, we can't change it. So if people say any changes in those, in the constitution, it won't be our change. It will change coming from a different perspective.
Very important. You are watching the Nyohobai show here on the Gambian Talents TV. Pa Usman Diouf is your host. It's very interesting. I know we've been here for a while, but this is very important. Then it is left for you, the Gambians, to actually watch and see what is in your constitution, what is in the final draft constitution. Let's read it. Let's find time to look at it and read it and know. That way we can hold the government and other institutions accountable in case there would be any change. Yes, thank you very much.
Well, if I can add this, I mean, people have expressed skepticism about what's going to happen to the new constitution once we submit it. Is it going to gather dust on somebody's desk, and things like that, and the approach I've taken, and some people might say it's a naive way of looking at this. I take the optimistic approach. If the government genuinely wasn't interested in this and is just window dressing, would they go ahead and establish the institution first? Secondly, would they be expending so much money in facilitating the work of the CRC? I mean, to me, some things are sheer common sense, but there are realities I cannot discount as well.
Yeah, but then people can argue that Yahya Jammeh, for example, has established several commissions. I mean, when he came into power, nothing happened to a lot of those commissions until this day.
Yeah.
The Algali Commission and several other commissions, whether Commission of Inquiry or any other commission, a lot of them nothing came out of. And we have seen even with this government too, the Faraba Banta Commission came and few other commissions. Until this minute, there is not much that is being done about those
But
things.
again,
So-
Pa Osman, let me go back to what I said earlier. Let's draw a distinction here.
Yes.
All right. A commission of inquiry follows a particular procedure. All right. I think we all, as a people, need to be cognizant of that and allow that process to phase out the way
That
it
is-
should. But it is not. You are not wrong to assume that similar, a similar result may come in relation to the draft that we are working on to submit.
You made the argument that the government would not have taken all these steps, established the commission, spend all this money, support you through the process and all of that. Other governments, especially Jammeh's government, have done the same thing.
And you are right. When I said that, that's the optimist in me talking.
Okay.
And I prefer to give people the benefit of the doubt. And if you genuinely set on a journey, my role is to see the genuineness in that journey and support you in that process,
Fair enough.
rather than building negativity into the journey.
You are an optimist.
All right, I remain an optimist. I think I think it's the best foundations to start on. When you start with pessimism, you go nowhere.
It's very good.
And then you're filled with frustration along the way. To me, I think we could utilize our time and our resources and our energies, in a much better fashion.
So, let's give President Barrow and the current government the benefit of the doubt.
I think
with all the commissions,
I think we
especially
should.
with the CRC, with everything that has been
I think we should.
argument.
And I, as chairperson, and indeed with other commissioners, we have regular contacts. Especially in me as chairman, I have regular contact with the honorable minister, and I can tell you that I've seen any disingenuity, in this process as far as the government is concerned. If I had seen it, I would have been concerned, and I would have been transparent about it because my integrity is involved. All right. So I think the way we are approaching it is making sure that we are professional in terms of how we carry out our work, and we have a role to play. We have a mandate to execute. Once that is completed, we hand it over. Then thereafter, Gambians know exactly where the next step is and what needs to happen.
Fair enough. Thank you for answering those questions. Now, we are in the diaspora and we are very concerned. And of course, you've heard it from your engagements in Europe and over here yesterday in Seattle with Gambians in the diaspora, voting rights and participating in the election and stuff. How did the Gambians on the ground respond to that particular thing? Do they feel like folks in the diaspora are Gambians and should be?
Of course they know they are Gambians.
But then what was the opinion like on that particular issue from the locals?
I think generally there is consensus that the diaspora should be given the opportunity to vote. There's general
Participate
consensus.
in contest elections too, or that one no?
There are differences of opinion on those things, and one of the things that come to me, and again, not me as chair or CRC member, but as a Gambian, individual Gambian, is what I see basically as a disconnect between Gambians in the diaspora and Gambians back home. And I've said this when we had this consultation with a group of Gambian diasporans on the 10th of June, that and one of them raised it actually, is the level of disconnect, the lack of trust between the two. And that's a very dangerous thing in my view. I don't think we should have anything like that. And I've always been, like, one of the things that we've had to wrestle with as a commission is how do we limit cost in relation to the external diaspora consultations? How do we, can't we do it differently? So that we don't have to be engaged in this face-to-face with the Gambian diaspora.
Just this morning, somebody told me it's a waste of money, you guys, and time, you guys coming to.
Yeah, people.
In the US, just this morning.
Yeah. Some people will say that. But again, you see, people are looking at it from a money perspective, rather than as developing a constitution that is so fundamental to the country, fundamental to our lives, once in a lifetime event. Can you quantify that in money terms? I don't think so.
Tell us, we didn't talk about the funding. I mean, time is going, but the funding, who is funding the CRC?
Well, we deal with the government. We deal with the government directly. I mean, there are donor agencies that are obviously interfacing with the government. Well, we don't get involved in that. So we and they've been very supportive in that regard. People will.
But it's not taxpayers' money. I mean, I would say taxpayers, but it's not directly coming from the government. We have donor.
I wouldn't know that. I wouldn't know that. All I can tell you is that the donors are involved and they are assisting us. We have other institutions that are assisting us directly by providing support, providing resources and things like that. We get funding from the government to get certain things done and so on. Where the funding is coming from, I wouldn't know that. But again, I don't.
It's important for you to know.
It is.
You run an institution to make an idea at the time.
No, well, I don't expect the government to do that. I mean, I think when you deal with government, you have to deal with government in good faith. You don't. You can't make a statement like that. We have to trust our government to do the right thing. No, Passman. No, we trust that our government is raising its revenue legitimately.
Being an optimist is good, but at some point there should be
for me to engage in that process.
I am asking you the question.
No, but you see, if I were to engage in that process, effectively I could be seen as being political.
But just finding out, just out and be like, okay, hey, in fact, journalists are asking me.
Ask them where they get the funding from.
Yes.
No, man, I think that is going down.
The question is being thrown at me. Where are we being funded, or how are we being funded? You don't think it's the same?
I hear a lot of people
You've
say.
Not been asked that question. Never been asked that question.
I might have been asked that question, and publicly I've stated that we do have support from certain institutions like the UNDP. But the reality, we know that the UNDP, for example, provides funding. Other donors obviously channel things through the NDP, but that money doesn't directly come to us. It goes through the government and then finds its way to us. So what specific amount really goes to the government? That's not really.
So there was not a budget established for this year.
No, there is a budget. We have a budget. We submit it to the government. I can't tell you that offhand. I can't recall.
So it's not one of those. It's not supposed to be public. Google and you have nada.
No, but
commission report came out. Some people have a heart attack that they spent $50 million or whatever during their mandate. People just to pay the commissioners. The messages were circulating on WhatsApp. People politicize it, be like, see what Johnny Commission did, 50 million just to pay the commissioners and basic logistics with what was spent in the administration or the actual commission itself. Some people had a heart attack with that.
We have an issue. I don't know what the solution is to this, Pausman, honestly. And, to me, it's bothersome if we have to quantify everything in money terms. It's just a problem. Obviously, the public has legitimate concerns. When you're going to spend so much money and people are not even getting their feeder roads during the rainy season, they are shut in.
And this is why the argument that
health, people have health, and we've had a lot of these stories.
In fact, CRC was mentioned by some people. Like, okay, the commission spent 50 million. CRC is here, TRRC is here. All the commissions are mentioned. Like, okay, let's wait until they all finish.
Tell me something. Tell me something. Do you think transparent democracy come cheap?
No,
I think sometimes we need to be honest with ourselves as a people if we must make progress. Certain works have to be done. They're not going to be done, on a silver platter. We have to we have to recognize that they come at a cost, you know, and it's either we expend the cost or we remain where we are. You know, if we are serious about developing our country, if we are serious to lifting our people from where we are at now, then we need to recognize and you know, live with certain realities. You know, the question is, how are those realities being administered? Are they being transparent? Are they being fair? Do they represent value for money? You know, it's things like that. In my view, that some people will disagree with me completely and say I'm maybe taking a self-serving position, and I'm not going to blame them for that. All right, we need to respect public opinions on those things. But I think ultimately, in my view, what we need to concentrate on is ensuring that when institutions are established, they deliver and deliver effectively. You know, because otherwise that's a total waste of money.
Nothing comes cheap in life anyway.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, it's important.
Exactly.
Well, you're watching the Nyokoba show once again. We are almost at the end of it. You started the public consultation with the diaspora and the external consultation. Started in Europe. I saw you in some of those countries.
Yeah, we started in Africa and then
in
to
Africa,
Europe.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
that was the first phase.
Mauritania
Mauritania and the Middle East.
Yes. So how did that go actually? Yes.
So far, the external consultations have been very good, and I'm glad we decided to undertake the external consultation, in as much as some people
What's
think
the argument? Just to counter what some of the other people are.
Gambians have turned up.
Okay.
Gambians have turned up and have expressed opinion that they like the fact that they are being consulted. And they feel that as Gambians, their views are being respected and they are not being treated as aliens. All right? And that's important because the Gambian diaspora is an important constituent of our country.
Absolutely.
It's an important constituency. So we cannot disregard that fact, which is why I've always said, as a CRC, we have to be very careful not to create that division between a Gambian living in the Gambia and the Gambian living in the diaspora. We're all Gambians.
Disconnect. Lulu is a whole topic of it.
Yeah, we are all Gambians. We are all Gambians. You have to recognize that. If we start treating each other like indigenous and foreign, then that's the beginning of a huge problem.
That's right.
And we all have a responsibility as citizens to guard against things like that. You know, it's not like the CRC is wasting money. I've even seen somebody say we travel business class. Frankly speaking, as chairman, I travel economy. You know, we live in cheap hotels.
Well, I'm a witness to that. It's a hotel, but definitely he doesn't live in a five-star hotel. I am confirming that right now. I mean, it's not one of the most expensive hotels in Seattle, so I can establish the humility in it where we are.
You know, we try to cut corners. We try to cut corners to make savings. You know, because ultimately we are all conscientious that. You know, if we do anything wrong, we'll be part of the blame, and justifiably. So we are not wasting public funds. I want people to understand that. You know, but I mean, in fact, when we are doing the public consultations, for instance, we were paying our staff, support staff, more than we were receiving as commissioners. Because we wanted to make sure that they were comfortable. They got what they wanted. We could manage. When we started
some people's argument is the team is too large. Why do you have to go with the whole number of people? Like
I think
how many people came to America,
I think people,
and how many went to Europe?
Again, they are looking at numbers instead of the reality facing it. Because if you look at it, we in fact, as a matter of fact, all 11 commissioners should have been here because what people are saying, hearing it directly, is what helps to form our opinion. All right? But we decided we were going to divide ourselves into two teams. But in addition to that, it's the support staff. We need the support staff. We have a team of researchers. They need to know the issues. So that when we task them with specific, they know exactly what it is, what to do. We need our transcribers who will write and prepare reports and draw analysis, you know, on what has transpired. In some cases, we haven't done it in relation to the US, we have to carry with us translators. Because in some of the diaspora communities, our Gambian diaspora don't speak English.
That's right.
You know, so we have to allow them in order to speak in their local languages so everybody can understand. So I think there are certain realities that some may not be aware of,
That informed your
that
decision.
inform our decision. It's not like we are being extravagant. Absolutely not. And some Gambians are criticizing